A flight attendant denies a black woman access to the first-class restroom. Her response shocks everyone. Have you ever wondered what it takes to bring down a giant? Not with brute force, but with courage, strategy, and unshakable determination? Today, we'll dive into the story of Elena Jordan, a woman who dared to stand up against an airline that underestimated her, ignored her, and ultimately paid the price for it. What started as a single act of discrimination turned into a fight that shook an entire industry to its core. And the twist? She didn't just fight for herself, she changed the game for everyone. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The hum of the airport terminal was a cacophony of hurried footsteps, muffled announcements, and the occasional rattle of luggage wheels on polished tiles. Among the sea of travelers, Elena Jordan stood out, not just for her striking presence, but for the way she carried herself. Her tailored gray suit, paired with modest but elegant heels, spoke of quiet confidence. Her skin, rich and dark like freshly brewed coffee, glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and her natural curls framed her face like a crown. Elena wasn't one to flaunt wealth or success, though she had both. As a self-made entrepreneur, she had risen through sheer determination, navigating a world that often tried to box her in. She'd learned early in life that people would judge her before she even spoke. Her mother had always told her, "Elena, they'll look at your skin before they look at your soul, so make sure your soul shines brighter." She held that lesson close, even now, as she stood in line at the gate, holding a simple leather tote bag. Inside, her tablet buzzed with emails, offers, contracts, and opportunities that could shift industries. But Elena wasn't thinking about those at the moment. She was reflecting on how far she'd come. Born in a small southern town, she had faced her fair share of no's growing up. No, you can't join that club. No, you can't take that advanced class. No, you don't belong here. Each rejection had fueled her desire to prove them wrong. The boarding call interrupted her thoughts. Elena adjusted the strap on her bag and moved forward. She noticed how the flight attendants at the first-class entrance greeted the predominantly white passengers with bright smiles and effortless warmth. When it was her turn, the smiles faltered. The greeting was clipped, perfunctory. "Enjoy your flight," the attendant said, barely making eye contact. Elena didn't react, though she felt the familiar sting of being underestimated. She had long since learned to save her energy for battles that mattered. On board, Elena settled into her economy seat near the aisle. She hadn't chosen first class this time, not because she couldn't afford it, but because she liked to stay grounded. Success hadn't made her forget the people she came from. The single mother working 2 jobs, the elderly neighbor who babysat her when her mom couldn't. She preferred to sit among people who reminded her of home, of real struggle and real triumphs. As the plane began its ascent, Elena opened her tote and pulled out her tablet. She scanned through her schedule for the next week. Meetings with investors, a keynote speech at a diversity conference, and a mentoring session with young entrepreneurs. Her days were always full, but she welcomed the challenge. Each task was a step toward the future she envisioned, a world where women like her could walk into any room, any boardroom, and be seen as equals. The fastened seatbelt sign blinked off, and passengers began to shuffle around. Elena felt a slight discomfort in her stomach, likely from the rushed sandwich she had grabbed before boarding. She glanced toward the front of the plane. The first-class restroom was unoccupied, while the one in economy had a line forming. She hesitated for a moment. She knew how it would look, a black woman walking into first class without a ticket for that section. But why should that matter? She was a paying customer, and she had the right to use the facilities just like anyone else. Elena exhaled, her resolve hardening. She rose from her seat, her posture as straight as the rows of overhead compartments, and began to walk forward. Her heels clicked softly against the narrow aisle, each step echoing a quiet defiance. The moment she crossed the invisible line separating economy from first class, she felt it, a shift in the atmosphere. Conversations quieted, and she could feel eyes on her back, assessing, judging. But Elena kept her head high. She wasn't just walking to a restroom. She was walking for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Elena reached the curtain that separated first class from economy, a physical barrier but also a symbolic one. Her fingers brushed the edge of the fabric as she pushed it aside and stepped through. The air seemed different here, cooler, quieter, tinged with a sense of exclusivity. Plush seats reclined farther than those in economy, and passengers lounged with glasses of champagne or noise-canceling headphones. No one in this section appeared hurried or restless. It was a bubble of privilege. Her steps were measured, deliberate. She wasn't in a rush, nor was she seeking anyone's approval. Elena had learned over time that moving with calm confidence unsettled those who expected her to shrink. As she neared the restroom door, she caught the sharp sound of heels against the carpet. The flight attendant, a tall, sharp-featured woman with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, approached with a look that was equal parts suspicion and annoyance. Her name tag read Jennifer Miller, and her tailored uniform seemed to reflect her personality, rigid and unyielding. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jennifer said, stepping into Elena's path. Her tone was polite but cold, like a blade sheathed in silk. "This restroom is reserved for first-class passengers only." Elena's eyes met Jennifer's, steady and unblinking. "I understand that," she said evenly. "The economy restroom has a line, and this one is unoccupied. I don't think it'll be an issue." Jennifer's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's policy," she said, her voice firm. "You'll need to use the restroom in your assigned section." Elena felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She knew what this was, an assertion of power, a reminder of perceived boundaries. But she wasn't someone who backed down from confrontation, especially when she knew she was in the right. "I wasn't aware the restroom policies were so rigid," Elena said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I've flown plenty of times, and this has never been an issue." Jennifer's expression hardened, and her body language shifted. She squared her shoulders, planting herself firmly in Elena's way. "Well, I'm informing you now. Please return to your seat." Around them, heads began to turn. First-class passengers lowered their magazines and took off their headphones. Their curiosity piqued. Elena could feel their gazes like pinpricks on her skin. Some watched with open interest, while others wore smirks of thinly veiled satisfaction. She had seen those smirks before, the ones that said, "I knew she didn't belong here." Elena inhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the strap of her tote bag. She could have walked away, could have swallowed the humiliation and returned to her seat. But something in her refused to yield. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every time someone like Jennifer had made someone like her feel small, feel lesser. "Is there a manager I can speak to?" Elena asked, her tone still composed but unyielding. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "The captain supports my decision, ma'am. Now, if you don't comply, I'll have to escalate this matter." The word escalate hung in the air, a veiled threat. Elena could feel the tension building around her. Passengers were whispering now, their voices blending into a low murmur. She glanced down the aisle and saw the other flight attendants watching from a distance, their faces unreadable. Elena stood her ground. "Escalate it then," she said, her voice as steady as the hum of the engines. "I'd like to see how far this goes over something as simple as using a restroom." For a moment, Jennifer hesitated, caught off guard by Elena's refusal to back down. But the pause was fleeting. She turned sharply on her heel and disappeared toward the cockpit, leaving Elena standing alone. The whispers grew louder, and Elena felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. She didn't fidget or flinch. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and clasped her hands in front of her. If they wanted a spectacle, she would give them one, but on her terms. Minutes later, Jennifer returned, flanked by the captain, a middle-aged man with a clipped mustache and a name tag that read Captain Robert Davis. He approached Elena with the practiced air of authority, his brow furrowed in mild irritation. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his tone measured but laced with impatience. Elena explained the situation succinctly, keeping her voice calm and her words precise. She had no intention of raising her voice or giving them any ammunition to dismiss her. When she finished, the captain sighed and shook his head. "Ms. Miller is correct," he said. "First-class amenities are for first-class passengers. I need you to return to your seat." Elena studied him for a moment. His tone wasn't as overtly hostile as Jennifer's, but it carried the same message. You don't belong here. It was a message she had heard all her life in different words and different contexts. But this time, she wouldn't let it slide. "Captain Davis," she said evenly, I wasn't aware that human necessities were classified as amenities. If your restroom policies are so inflexible, perhaps they should be stated more clearly during ticket purchases. Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Captain Davis's face tightened, and Jennifer's lips pressed into a thin line. Elena could tell she had struck a nerve, but neither of them was willing to concede. "I'm afraid we're done discussing this," the captain said. "Please return to your seat now, or we'll have to involve airport authorities upon landing." Elena held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the economy section, her footsteps measured and deliberate. As she passed through the curtain, she caught sight of Jennifer's smug expression. Elena said nothing, but inside, she felt a fire igniting, a quiet, simmering rage that she channeled into resolve. She returned to her seat, opened her tablet, and began typing. She didn't need to make a scene to fight back. Her power lay in her actions, not her words. And by the time this flight landed, she would set those actions in motion. The flight seemed to drag on endlessly after Elena returned to her seat. The murmur of whispers in the first-class section still echoed faintly in her mind, like the remnants of a storm refusing to settle. Elena sat upright, her face calm, but her mind racing. She had endured moments like this before, microaggressions, slights wrapped in false civility. But something about this incident struck a deeper chord. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate her in public. The woman seated next to Elena, a middle-aged passenger with warm hazel eyes, leaned toward her cautiously. She hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to speak, then softly said, "I saw what happened. That was uncalled for." Elena turned to her, surprised by the quiet solidarity. "Thank you," she said, her voice low but steady. "I'm not sure what's worse, the act itself or how normal it feels for them to do it." The woman nodded. "I've seen it too often. I travel frequently for work, and there's always someone who gets treated like they don't belong. But this felt personal." Elena offered a small smile in return. "It usually is." The brief exchange steadied her resolve. She wasn't alone in recognizing the injustice, and that validation, however small, fanned the flames of her determination. As the flight attendants began their routine checks before landing, Elena noticed Jennifer walking down the aisle, her gaze sweeping over the passengers like a hawk surveying prey. When she reached Elena's row, she paused, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. There was no mistaking the hostility in her stance. "Is there a problem?" Elena asked, her voice calm but firm. Jennifer tilted her head, her smile thin and insincere. "No problem, ma'am. Just making sure everything is in order. After all, we wouldn't want any more misunderstandings." The words were coated with condescension, and Elena felt her fingers tighten around the armrest. "Misunderstandings happen when policies are applied inconsistently," she replied evenly, "or perhaps when they're used as an excuse for something else entirely." Jennifer's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "If you feel our policies are unclear, you're welcome to provide feedback through the proper channels after the flight." "I intend to," Elena said, her eyes locked on Jennifer's. "But I'm certain this conversation will be remembered long before any feedback form is read." The air between them crackled with tension. Passengers nearby pretended not to notice, but their sideways glances betrayed their interest. Jennifer held Elena's gaze for a moment longer, then turned sharply and walked away. As the plane began its descent, Elena noticed the subtle shift in energy among the crew. Jennifer and the other flight attendants whispered to one another at the front of the cabin, their eyes occasionally darting in Elena's direction. It was clear they were discussing her, likely framing the narrative to their advantage. Elena watched them calmly, her mind already working. She could anticipate their next move. They would attempt to paint her as difficult, uncooperative, perhaps even disruptive. It was a tactic she had encountered before, one designed to undermine her credibility before she had a chance to speak. But Elena had no intention of playing defense. She knew her rights, and she had the resources to ensure they were respected. When the plane touched down, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." His tone was neutral, but Elena detected a hint of tension beneath the practiced professionalism. As the passengers began to gather their belongings, Jennifer approached Elena's row again, this time accompanied by another flight attendant. Her expression was a mix of forced politeness and underlying triumph. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, her voice louder than necessary. Please remain seated for a moment. We need to have a word with you before you disembark. Elena's brow arched slightly. Is there a reason for this? It's standard procedure when a passenger exhibits challenging behavior, Jennifer replied, her words carefully chosen to sound official but vague. Elena held her gaze, unflinching. Challenging behavior, she repeated, her voice calm but cutting. Because I question your inconsistent application of policies? Or is it because I didn't immediately comply with your baseless demands? The passengers around them had gone still, their curiosity now fully piqued. Jennifer's composure slipped for a fraction of a second before she straightened her posture. This isn't the place to discuss it. Please remain seated. Elena leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. Very well. As the plane emptied, Elena sat quietly, observing Jennifer and the captain as they huddled near the cockpit. She could hear snippets of their conversation, words like disruptive and refusal to comply floating toward her. It was a calculated move, and Elena recognized it for what it was, an attempt to create a record that justified their behavior. When the last passenger had disembarked, Jennifer approached Elena once more, this time with a member of airport security in tow. The officer, a burly man with a no-nonsense expression, looked at Elena briefly before turning to Jennifer for an explanation. This passenger refused to comply with crew instructions, Jennifer said, her tone clipped and authoritative. We just need to document the incident. Elena rose slowly, her movements deliberate. She adjusted her suit jacket, then looked directly at the officer. I'd like to ensure the documentation is accurate, she said, her voice steady. And I'd like to add my own account of the incident. The officer nodded, his expression neutral. We can do that. As Elena followed them off the plane, she caught the glint of triumph in Jennifer's eyes. It was a fleeting moment, but it spoke volumes. Jennifer thought she had won, that Elena would leave this encounter diminished and chastened. The jet bridge felt colder than the plane itself, an artificial chill seeping through the industrial walls. Elena walked steadily, her heels clicking softly against the metal flooring. Jennifer followed closely, her expression a carefully crafted mask of professionalism that barely concealed the satisfaction flickering in her eyes. The airport security officer walked ahead of them, his bulk creating a barrier between the confined space and the open terminal beyond. At the end of the bridge, a makeshift station had been set up, a small desk with a laptop, a few chairs, and 2 additional security personnel standing nearby. Elena felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to let it show. She carried herself with the same calm authority she had displayed on the plane, her chin held high and her gaze steady. As Elena approached the desk, one of the security personnel gestured for her to sit. Jennifer took a seat opposite her, her body angled slightly as if to dominate the conversation. The officer who had escorted them stood at the side, arms crossed, observing the exchange. We need to address your behavior during the flight, Jennifer began, her tone clipped and overly formal. Your refusal to comply with crew instructions created unnecessary disruptions. Elena let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding. Disruptions? She repeated slowly, her voice calm but laced with incredulity. Because I asked to use an unoccupied restroom? Or was it because I refused to accept an arbitrary and discriminatory policy? Jennifer's lips thinned. Ma'am, this isn't about discrimination. It's about maintaining order and ensuring passenger safety. Passenger safety? Elena echoed, leaning forward slightly. Her voice remained level, but her words were sharp. How exactly was safety compromised by my request? Was it the act of walking to the front of the plane, or was it simply my presence in first class that made you uncomfortable? The officer at the desk shifted slightly, his eyes flicking between Elena and Jennifer. There was a tension in the room now, thick and palpable, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Jennifer's composure faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Your actions disrupted the workflow of the crew, she said, her voice rising slightly. You questioned our authority and refused to follow instructions. That's grounds for intervention. Elena tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. Intervention? She asked, her tone cutting. What exactly are you intervening against? My audacity to challenge a policy rooted in bias, or my refusal to let you diminish me? Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Jennifer visibly bristled. She turned to the security officer, her voice taking on an edge of urgency. You see what I mean? This is the kind of confrontational behavior we had to deal with during the flight. The officer looked at Elena, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, can you tell us your side of the story? Elena folded her hands in her lap, her movements deliberate and composed. Of course, she said. She recounted the events of the flight in precise detail, her words measured and deliberate. She didn't raise her voice, but each sentence was a carefully placed stone, building a wall against Jennifer's narrative. As Elena finished, the officer leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing slightly. This doesn't sound like a safety issue, he said, glancing at Jennifer. It sounds like a misunderstanding. Jennifer's face flushed. With all due respect, sir, I was there. This passenger was combative and uncooperative. She refused to return to her seat when instructed. Elena smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. I believe the word you're looking for is assertive, she said. And if advocating for myself makes me uncooperative, then so be it. The officer studied her for a moment, then turned back to Jennifer. Do you have any documentation of the incident? Written reports, witness statements? Jennifer hesitated. Not yet. We were planning to file the report after landing. Well, the officer said, his tone neutral, it seems premature to escalate this further without a full account from all parties involved. Jennifer opened her mouth to protest, but the officer held up a hand. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. For now, I suggest we let Jordan go about her business. Jennifer's frustration was evident, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. I strongly advise against letting this go without consequences, she said, her voice taut with barely concealed anger. Elena stood slowly, her movements deliberate. She looked directly at Jennifer, her gaze steady and unyielding. The only consequences, she said softly, will be for those who think they can treat others with disrespect and walk away unchallenged. Her words struck like a whip, and for a moment, Jennifer seemed at a loss for how to respond. The officer nodded toward Elena. You're free to go, ma'am. Elena gathered her belongings, her posture as composed as ever. As she walked away, she could feel Jennifer's glare boring into her back, but she didn't look back. She had more important things to focus on. Outside the terminal, Elena stepped into the sleek black car waiting for her. Her assistant, a sharp-eyed young woman named Nina, greeted her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. How did it go? Nina asked as the car pulled away. Elena leaned back against the seat, her expression calm but resolute. Exactly as I expected, she said. Now it's my turn. Nina nodded, already opening her laptop. What's the next step? Elena's lips curved into a faint smile. First, we make sure their higher-ups know exactly what happened. Then, we remind them who they underestimated. As the cityscape blurred past the window, Elena felt the fire within her burn brighter. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jennifer had set the stage for a battle, and Elena was more than ready to take it to the next level. The car ride from the airport to the city was quiet, the hum of the engine a soothing counterpoint to the storm swirling in Elena's mind. The streets outside blurred into streaks of light and shadow as the driver navigated through the early evening traffic. Elena sat in the back seat, her tablet balanced on her lap. Her assistant, Nina, was seated beside her, her fingers flying across the keyboard of her laptop, preparing the first wave of emails Elena had dictated during their drive. Are you sure about this approach? Nina asked, her voice soft but tinged with curiosity. We could go directly to the media. An incident like this would explode online. Elena shook her head, her gaze fixed on the glowing screen of her tablet. Not yet. This isn't about spectacle, it's about accountability. I want them to feel this where it hurts most, at their foundation, not their reputation. Nina nodded, her admiration for Elena's strategic mind evident. So, we're starting with the board? Elena tapped on her tablet, pulling up a list of names and contact details. Yes, I want them to understand the gravity of this before it becomes public knowledge. If we can make this about their policies and practices, they won't be able to deflect it as a one-off incident. By the time the car pulled into the driveway of Elena's townhouse, she had made her decision. As Nina carried their bags inside, Elena settled into the sleek leather chair in her home office and placed a call to one of the airline's board members, a man she had met at a leadership summit the previous year. His name was Stephen Collins, and though their interactions had been brief, Elena knew enough about him to believe he would listen. Elena Jordan? Stephen greeted, his voice warm but cautious. This is a surprise. What can I do for you? Elena wasted no time. Stephen, I need to talk to you about something that happened on one of your flights today. It's a serious issue, and I think you'll want to address it before it becomes a larger problem. Her tone was calm but firm, each word chosen carefully. Stephen's silence stretched for a moment before he responded, his voice more serious now. Go on. Elena recounted the incident in detail, sparing no nuance. She described the blatant discrimination, the condescending treatment, and the calculated escalation by the flight crew. As she spoke, she could hear Stephen scribbling notes, his occasional murmurs of acknowledgement indicating that he was absorbing every word. When she finished, there was a pause on the line. Then Stephen said, "This is deeply concerning, Elena. I'll admit, this isn't the first time I've heard complaints about that particular crew, but this is on another level. It's not just about the crew," Elena said. "It's about the culture that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked. If this is how they treat paying customers, imagine what it's like for their staff members who don't fit their mold." Stephen sighed. "You're right. This needs to be addressed immediately. What do you want from me?" Elena's voice softened, though her determination remained unwavering. "I want accountability. I want this addressed not as an isolated incident, but as part of a systemic problem that needs to be fixed. And if it isn't, I'll have no choice but to escalate." Stephen hesitated, then said, "I'll take this to the board first thing in the morning. You have my word." The next morning, Elena sat at her dining table, sipping coffee as she reviewed the latest reports from her assistant. Nina had been busy through the night, compiling a dossier of similar complaints against the airline, incidents of discrimination, mistreatment, and unprofessional conduct that painted a damning picture. "This is more widespread than I expected," Nina said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "There's a pattern here, and it's not subtle." Elena flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing as she read accounts of passengers denied services, employees reporting hostile work environments, and settlements quietly swept under the rug. Each story added fuel to the fire burning within her. "We're not just dealing with bad individuals," Elena said, her voice low. "This is a systemic failure, and that makes it even more important to handle this strategically." Nina nodded. "I've also reached out to a few key organizations, civil rights groups, consumer advocacy networks. They're ready to step in if we need them." Elena smiled faintly. "Good. Let's keep that in our back pocket for now. For now, we focus on the board. If they don't take action, then we escalate." By midday, Elena received a call from Stephen. His voice was measured but strained. "The board is divided," he said. "Some members are willing to take this seriously, but others, well, they're more concerned about the optics of admitting fault." Elena expected this. "Optics won't save them when this goes public," she said. "If they don't act now, they'll be dealing with far worse than a few bad headlines." Stephen sighed. "I'm trying to get them to see that, but you know how these things work. Change is slow, and people are resistant." "Then make them understand that slow change isn't an option," Elena said firmly. "This is their chance to get ahead of the problem. If they don't take it, I will." That evening, Elena drafted a letter addressed to the entire board. It was eloquent and precise, detailing her experience, the broader implications of the airline's practices, and her expectations for meaningful change. She ended with a clear warning. If they failed to act, she would ensure that the world knew what kind of company they were running. As she hit send, Elena felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had taken the first step, but she knew the battle was far from over. This wasn't just about one flight or one crew member. It was about dismantling a system that thrived on exclusion and prejudice. And Elena Jordan had no intention of losing. The morning sunlight filtered through Elena's office window, casting long shadows on the walls. She stood by her desk, her tablet resting in her hand, scrolling through the responses to her letter. Most of the replies from the airline board were predictable, a mix of polite platitudes and veiled attempts to minimize her concern. But one email stood out, its subject line sharp and unapologetic: MS. "Jordan, your complaints are unfounded." Elena clicked on it, her brow furrowing as she read the contents. The email was from Bernard Larson, one of the airline's most influential board members. His tone was dismissive, bordering on condescending. He argued that the incident on the flight was a misunderstanding at best and an exaggeration at worst. He ended with a thinly veiled warning about the potential consequences of pursuing the matter further. Elena's jaw tightened. She wasn't surprised. She had encountered men like Bernard before, men who wielded power as a weapon to silence dissent. But this time, she wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been subjected to this kind of treatment. She forwarded the email to Nina with a brief note. Let's prepare a formal response. This isn't over. Later that day, Elena received an invitation to join a video conference with several key members of the airline's board. It was scheduled for the evening, a time chosen no doubt to convey their importance and control. Elena accepted without hesitation, knowing this would be her opportunity to confront them directly. As the clock struck 7, Elena logged into the virtual meeting. The screen filled with faces, some familiar, others not. Bernard Larsen's face dominated the top row, his expression stern and unyielding. Stephen Collins was also present, his demeanor calmer but no less serious. Several other board members joined, their expressions ranging from neutral to skeptical. Ms. Jordan, Bernard began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. We've reviewed your letter and the allegations you've made. While we appreciate your feedback, we believe the situation has been blown out of proportion. Elena's gaze didn't waver. Blown out of proportion? She repeated, her tone calm but piercing. Are you suggesting that my experience was fabricated, or that the discrimination I faced is somehow insignificant? Bernard leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. What I'm saying is that there are protocols in place, and it seems those protocols were followed. Your interpretation of the events, while unfortunate, doesn't necessarily reflect reality. Elena paused, letting the silence stretch before she responded. Reality? She said slowly, her voice steady. Let's talk about reality. The reality is that I was denied basic respect and dignity by your crew. The reality is that this isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that your company has allowed to persist. Her words were deliberate, each one landing with precision. And the reality, she continued, is that dismissing this as a misunderstanding only proves my point, that systemic issues are being ignored because they're inconvenient to address. Stephen spoke up, his tone cautious. Elena, I think what Bernard is trying to say is that we need to carefully evaluate the situation before taking any drastic actions. We don't want to make decisions based on emotions. Elena's gaze shifted to Stephen, softening slightly. This isn't about emotions, Stephen. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. As the discussion continued, the tension in the virtual room grew palpable. Some board members expressed agreement with Elena, acknowledging the need for change. Others echoed Bernard's stance, emphasizing the risks of admitting fault and the potential damage to the airline's reputation. Bernard's frustration became more evident as the conversation dragged on. Ms. Jordan, he said sharply, we can't cater to every passenger's perception of justice. There are bigger issues at stake here. Elena's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes remained cold. Bigger issues? She repeated. What could be bigger than ensuring that every passenger, regardless of their race, gender, or background, is treated with respect? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Stephen cleared his throat. Bernard, I think it's clear that this isn't going away. Elena has brought valid concerns to the table, and ignoring them will only make matters worse. Bernard's scowl deepened, but he didn't respond. Stephen turned back to Elena. What would you like to see happen? Elena's voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of her conviction. I want a formal investigation into the incident. I want clear and actionable changes to your policies and training programs. And I want accountability for the crew members involved. Bernard scoffed. You're asking for sweeping changes based on one incident. I'm asking for sweeping changes based on years of incidents. Elena shot back. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has been subjected to the same treatment and told to stay silent. As the meeting drew to a close, it was clear that the board was divided. Bernard's resistance remained strong, but Elena could see the cracks forming. Stephen's support, coupled with the cautious agreement of a few others, gave her hope that progress was possible. When the meeting ended, Elena leaned back in her chair, her mind buzzing with the events of the evening. This was only the beginning. She knew the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but she was prepared to face them. Nina stepped into the room, her expression expectant. How did it go? Elena smiled faintly. They're starting to listen, she said. Now, we make sure they don't stop. Elena sat at her desk, the weight of the board's resistance heavy on her mind. Bernard Larsen's dismissive attitude during the last meeting only strengthened her resolve. If the board wouldn't listen, She needed to force the issue another way, by rallying the voices they couldn't ignore, their employees. With Nina's help, Elena contacted Paul Jenkins, the head of the airline's employee union. Their call was direct and to the point. Paul was wary at first. "The board's ignored us for years," he said. "What makes you think this time will be different?" "Because this time, we have evidence, and we're not afraid to use it," Elena replied. "But I need the employees to stand with me." Paul sighed but agreed. "If you can inspire them to believe change is possible, you'll have our support." Elena and Nina spent the next week gathering stories from employees, flight attendants, pilots, and ground staff. Each account painted a damning picture of a toxic culture riddled with discrimination and indifference. One flight attendant, Isabel Gomez, tearfully recounted years of being overlooked and harassed. A pilot, Michael Chun, described a culture of silence and fear. Every story Elena heard deepened her determination. "These stories are the foundation of our fight," Elena told Nina. "We'll make their voices impossible to ignore." With the union's backing, Elena scheduled a press conference. It was a calculated risk, but she knew it was time to escalate. Standing at a modest podium with employees behind her, Elena addressed the crowd of reporters. "This isn't just my fight," she began. "It's the fight of every employee and passenger who has been mistreated by this airline's culture of exclusion. Change isn't optional, it's overdue." She detailed the systemic issues, backed by employee testimonies and data. Her words carried weight, and the reporters hung on every sentence. The press conference went viral within hours. Headlines exposed the airline's failings, and public outcry grew louder. On social media, hashtags calling for accountability trended worldwide. The board reacted swiftly. Bernard Larson issued a dismissive statement, calling Elena's claims exaggerated, but his words rang hollow against the evidence she presented. Meanwhile, Stephen Collins reached out privately, admitting, "The board is under immense pressure. Bernard's grip is weakening." Elena smiled at the news. "Good," she said, "because this fight is just getting started." Elena stood by the window of her office, the city skyline a glittering reminder of how far she had come. The airline was reeling from the public fallout of the press conference. Employee stories had gained traction, sparking outrage across social media and traditional news outlets. Bernard Larson's attempts to downplay the situation had only made things worse, painting him as out of touch and dismissive. But Elena wasn't finished. She had one more move to make, a move that would ensure this fight ended on her terms. That morning, Elena's phone buzzed with a call from Stephen Collins. His voice was tense but cautious. "Elena," he began, "the board is in chaos. Bernard's losing support, but the damage to the company is becoming unsalvageable. I need to know what you're planning." Elena's tone was calm but firm. "I've made it clear what I want: systemic change, accountability, and respect for your employees and customers." Stephen hesitated. "And if the board refuses to act?" Elena's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then I'll act for them." The meaning in her words was clear. She had resources they hadn't accounted for, and she was ready to use them. Behind the scenes, Elena and Nina had been working with financial advisors and legal teams to prepare for this moment. Using a network of silent investors, Elena had quietly acquired a majority stake in the airline. It was a calculated move, executed with precision over the course of weeks. When the official announcement came, it sent shock waves through the industry. Elena Jordan was now the largest shareholder in the airline, a position that gave her the authority to dictate its future. The board convened an emergency meeting, the tension in the room palpable as Elena walked in. She carried herself with the same quiet confidence she had shown from the start, but now her position was unassailable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena began, her voice steady. "As the airline's majority shareholder, I've decided to take immediate action to address the systemic failures that have plagued this company for far too long." Bernard Larson bristled, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "You can't just come in here and dismantle everything we've built." Elena turned to him, her gaze unflinching. "What you've built is a culture of discrimination and complacency," she said. "What I'm dismantling is a system that has allowed harm to go unchecked." Elena laid out her plan with precision. The airline's assets would be liquidated, and the proceeds would fund scholarships, employee severance packages, and initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion in the aviation industry. The employees who had come forward would be supported in finding new opportunities, and their voices would shape the policies of any future ventures Elena pursued. This company's name has become synonymous with injustice, Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of her resolve. Closing its doors isn't just the right decision. It's the only decision. The board was left speechless. Even Stephen, who had supported Elena's efforts, seemed stunned by the scale of her plan. Bernard, however, refused to go quietly. "You're ruining us," he shouted. "Do you have any idea what this will cost?" Elena met his fury with calm. "It will cost you your complacency," she said, "and it will give countless others the chance to thrive in a system that values them." The days that followed were a whirlwind of media coverage and corporate fallout. Headlines praised Elena's bold decision, while others debated the implications of shutting down such a prominent company. Employees expressed a mix of gratitude and relief, knowing their experiences had finally been validated. As the liquidation process began, Elena shifted her focus to the future. She partnered with civil rights organizations and industry leaders to create programs that would challenge the status quo in aviation. Her name became synonymous with courage and justice, a beacon for those fighting against systemic oppression. On the final day of the airline's operations, Elena visited the company's headquarters one last time. The building, once a symbol of power, now felt hollow, a reminder of what happens when institutions prioritize profit over people. Standing in the empty boardroom, Elena allowed herself a moment of reflection. This fight had been exhausting, but it had also been worth it. She had turned pain into purpose, using her power to create lasting change. As she walked out of the building, the doors closing behind her, Elena felt a sense of closure. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new era. Elena stood on the rooftop of her office building, the wind tugging gently at her curls as she gazed at the city skyline below. The bustling streets hummed with life, but in this moment, she allowed herself to feel the stillness. The fight with the airline had concluded, but the echoes of what she had accomplished reverberated far beyond its closed doors. The programs funded by the airline's liquidation began taking shape. Scholarships were being awarded to young people from underrepresented communities who dreamed of working in aviation. A diversity initiative, spearheaded by Elena herself, was gaining traction within the industry, forcing other companies to examine their own practices. Nina walked up beside her, a tablet in hand. "The first wave of scholarship recipients has been selected," she said, her voice filled with pride. "And the Diversity Council is hosting its first meeting next week." Elena smiled, her gaze unwavering. "Good. This isn't just about dismantling something broken. It's about building something better." Nina hesitated, then added, "There's also an invitation for you to speak at the Global Aviation Summit. They're calling you a trailblazer." Elena chuckled softly. "A trailblazer who shut down an airline? I'm sure that'll be a warm reception." "Maybe," Nina said, grinning. "But you've earned that title." A few days later, Elena visited one of the first community centers to receive funding from the initiative. The room was filled with young people, their eyes wide with curiosity as Elena shared her story. She spoke of her journey, the obstacles she had faced, and the strength it took to stand firm in the face of injustice. One girl, no older than 13, raised her hand timidly. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Shutting down the airline?" Elena paused, considering the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret standing up for what's right. Sometimes you have to let go of something broken to make room for something better. And that's what we're doing. Making room for all of you to soar higher than we ever could." The room erupted in applause, the young girl beaming with pride. Elena felt a swell of hope as she looked at their faces, knowing they were the future she had fought for. As the months passed, Elena received a call she hadn't expected, Stephen Collins. His voice carried a tone of reflection she hadn't heard before. "Elena," he began, "I've been thinking about everything that happened. I didn't agree with you at first, but you were right. That company needed to change, and we weren't brave enough to do it." Elena listened quietly, allowing him the space to speak. "I wanted to thank you," Stephen continued, "not just for what you've done for the industry, but for showing us what leadership really looks like." Elena's response was measured but sincere. "Thank you, Stephen. It wasn't an easy fight, but it was worth it. And I hope it's a lesson we all carry forward." In the final scenes of Elena's journey, she stands before a group of industry leaders at the Global Aviation Summit. The room is filled with executives, policymakers, and aspiring professionals. all waiting to hear from the woman who had dared to challenge the status quo. Change doesn't happen in comfort, Elena began, her voice steady and commanding. It happens when we confront what's broken and refuse to accept anything less than justice. The airline I shut down was a casualty of its own indifference, but from its ashes, we've built something stronger, something that represents the future of this industry. Her words carried a weight that resonated throughout the room. As she finished her speech, the crowd rose to its feet, their applause a testament to the power of her conviction. That evening, Elena boarded a flight, not as a passenger in economy or first class, but as a guest of honor. The airline was one of the new companies that had risen in the wake of her actions, its staff trained in empathy, respect, and inclusion. As the plane took off, Elena looked out the window, the city lights fading into the distance. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing her fight had made a difference. It wasn't just about one airline. It was about the lives she had touched and the change she had inspired. Elena Jordan's journey shows us that real change starts when one person refuses to back down. She didn't just challenge injustice. She dismantled it, transforming a moment of discrimination into a legacy of progress. Her actions didn't just hold a powerful company accountable. They inspired countless others to stand up and fight for what's right. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more powerful stories that inspire and challenge the way we see the world, be sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications. Together, let's keep shining a light on stories that truly matter. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.